Welcome to technical session number 44, where we are going to be talking about some securing workstation best practices, things that we can do as IT professionals and request our employees do to kind of help maintain security from the workstation perspective. So we're going to be describe how we would apply the 5 CompTIA best practices to secure a workstation, identify common pitfalls to securing them, and go into a little detail and explain why these are good things to do. Behavior skills and mindsets you want to keep in mind for this technical session are going to be customer focus. Without customers, we do not have a job. So customers must take primacy in our day-to-day actions. Doesn't mean they're always right, but they are always the customer. So beyond that, personal responsibility. We need to do what we say we're going to do. Take accountability for our actions, both the good and the bad. It's usually pretty easy for somebody to say, I messed up, I did the wrong thing, I made a mistake. That is far easier than saying, I did a great job, we were successful because of me on this one. People seem to think it's an easier thing to do, but it's really not. All right. So 5 best practices we're going to get into. We're going to be talking about passwords, getting into that a little bit. I know we talked about it a little bit before. We're going to be talking about account management, disabling auto run, data encryption, and patch and update management. So first, password best practices. So we typically want 12 or more characters with our passwords. Most places tend to have 8, but 12 is much better. We're going to get into why in just a few minutes. We're going to combine uppercase, lowercase letters, numbers, special characters, and all that fun stuff, and using at least one symbol, which would be a special character. Don't use consecutive letters or numbers, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. QWERTY is another one. Don't use password as your password. I think, what was it on the IT crowd or office? The office, where the guy was like, I always put incorrect as my password. That way, if I forget what it is and I type it, the system comes back and says your password is incorrect. The QWERTY thing is funny because if you look at the upper left side of your keyboard, you have QWERTY, QWERTY. One of my former partners with the with the cohorts, whatever, said when he first started, a guy just literally set up his password as just running his fingers across his keyboard. He's like, I thought that was the most clever thing ever because it seems so random. And then he's like, and now I realize that is awful. So yeah, we don't use this. Don't use the same password for more than one system. This one's a tough one because we tend to find that really awesome password that we like. It's easy for us to remember. We think it's a complex password, and then we want to use it for everything: our email, our bank accounts, our Amazon account, all that kind of fun stuff. But the problem is that if one of these things are breached and they get your password, then they are immediately going to go try it against everything else to see if they can get in. Email passwords get leaked all the time. And you can go onto the Tor sites and buy a bank of emails and passwords for like $10, $15. It's literally that easy. So regularly changing passwords helps mitigate this. Not using the same password for multiple things helps mitigate this. So we want to get into these basic best practices. Now, why are we so stuck on this? Just to give you guys an example, if I have a 4-character password and I only use uppercase letters, there are 456,976 possibilities. That's without getting into using common words and stuff like that. That's just 4 characters. And that seems like a lot, right? 456,000 possibilities. Kind of is. Let me add lowercase letters to that. I get 7,311,616 possibilities, just by saying upper and lowercase with 4 characters. Add numbers in. We're now up to 14,776 possibilities, just numbers. So we're seeing how this grows. The growth of this is exponential. We add special characters onto that now. We have what? 24 billion and 10. Wait. Sorry. Let me go back here. So just lowercase, 456,000. Lowercase and uppercase, 7,311,000. Uppercase, lowercase, and numbers. I forgot to carry my comma. 14,663,000. Special characters, 24 million. That's just with 4 characters. So a brute force attack, we can see it's going to take longer and longer and longer to try to figure this out, right? If we can get the offline password. Now, crank that up to 8 characters. I'm gonna go ahead and just put this in chat. That's how many possibilities you have with 8 characters. Kick it up to 12. That's with 12 characters. That's the number of possibilities for every password. That's just straight brute force. Now, if we start attacking this from a dictionary perspective, using common words and stuff like that, this gets cut down drastically. Because the vast majority of people use common words in many languages, right? So it's exponential growth as we create complexity and add characters. So if we follow these rules, 12 or more characters, using all the various uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and special characters, and we don't use consecutive numbers, we don't use common words in the common words in any language, or these adjacent characters, it can take a standard computer theoretically 10,000 years to guess your password using brute force algorithms. That's the strength of good password practices. So this is why we do it. Other best practices with regards to password, just beyond, the complexity of the password itself. We need to set the passwords so they expire, because people like to get that one password, hold on to it, and never change it again. So we want to make sure that passwords typically, standard is usually about 3 months. That's about as long as you want to go for passwords. So every 3 months, password has to be changed. If this is a high security item, like a bank account or something like that, you may want to change the passwords more frequently, maybe once a month. If it's research and development, maybe it's once a month, maybe it's once a week if it's really high security. And this prevents users, the longer a password is active, the more chance somebody has to crack that password. And then a lot of companies will use what's called a password history, which means they will remember your last 10 passwords that you used, and you can't use any of those. So you have to use a different one every time. Other thing we want to make sure, all systems, printers, routers, switches, all hosts on the network, make sure we are changing all the default account passwords, administrative and standard user, and disabling any guest accounts that may be active. because that is a massive weakness. If somebody basically sees a standard SSID or something like that, or username when they go to log in, that's the first thing they're going to try is the generic sign-in for those types of systems. Because companies don't put a random password in for every computer, they use a generic one each time. Makes it easy for them. Also makes it easier for hackers if we don't think to change them. Like on your routers. Just a reminder. So yeah, changing the standard ones. BIOS and UEFI passwords. Make sure these are set up. That way people can't go in and change the base settings for your computer. Like allowing auto run for USBs so that it makes it easier for viruses to be uploaded. Once again, if I have a disgruntled employee who was recently terminated and we go into their system and there's a BIOS password on it, how do we bypass this? What are our two methods?
Jumper.
Jumper, there's one.
Removing the CMOS battery?
And removing the CMOS battery. Resets all the settings on the BIOS for the UEFI. So then we can go in, the password has been bypassed, we can reestablish our settings, and hopefully we lock the case at that point so that they can't get in there and do the same thing. All right, screensaver password as well. This kind of mitigates people getting up and walking away from their computer and leaving it signed in. I believe it still is, Jose. I'll have to double check, but I believe it is still possible to bypass it that way with that or with the jumper. Screensaver passwords, something to kind of protect against yourself. If somebody gets up and walks away from their computer or whatever, you have a screensaver set to come on after about 5 minutes. And then if somebody tries to get out of the screensaver, then it has a password there to lock anyone out. So this is securing workstation best practices, Tawana. So screensaver password. And again, just to fail safe if somebody forgets to lock the computer when they get up and walk away. Emergencies happen, people get in a rush, they get up and they leave. This is just a backup. But generally, we want to be in a best practice of people locking their computer every time they get up. Unless they're just walking to the printer real quick and their computer's still within sight. So password history, we already talked about that. It can go as high as 24. Standard typically is, industry-wise, is roughly around 10 or 12. Then you can have a maximum password age, which again, standard is about 3 months or 90 days. And then a minimum password age. Can anybody guess why we have that? What is the minimum password age for?
Because it's a limit on how many times you can reuse passwords, you know, so many passwords you can come up with.
Okay. But why would the minimum age be important?
Just to prolong the use of a password.
Okay. So minimum age basically is once you set a password history where it takes, 10 different passwords or whatever to be able to reuse a password. Here's what some people will do. They will reset their password 10 times really quickly to get back to their original password. So if you set a minimum age, like 7 days, they can't do it all in one day. It takes a lot longer for them to get back to that password. So it requires them to at least have the password for a minimum amount of time. So that's where the minimum age comes in. It's another security measure to prevent reusing passwords. Minimum password length, we already got into that. 12 characters is generally a good minimum. And then it's good to train employees to kind of get away from the whole password idea and get more into the passphrase idea. Start looking at sentences, phrases, things like that. Kind of help you memorize passwords. It could be a line from a poem. It could be a line from a book. your favorite song, a movie, something along those lines, but just something that really stuck out to you and something you will remember. And it's much harder for a system to crack a phrase than it is a single word. And then making sure they meet complexity requirements. So uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and characters. Questions on passwords?
Can you go back one slide for me, please?
What?
Thank you.
No worries.
So I'm actually interested in what about like complex names, you know? Like
What do you
names that have names that have no relation to you.
Mhm.
Like what if I used your name? It's a password.
Not enough characters, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you're using like first and last names, yeah. I mean, if it's like completely no association, just like some random person you met on the street, as long as you can remember it. But yeah, the further from association with you, the harder it is to guess. Like I said, most people use the names of children, spouses, birthdays, things like that, pet names, cars, you know, things we have close association with, and unfortunately also things that we post about online. It's like, so happy to celebrate my son's 50th or 5th birthday this weekend. Da, 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 da. Oh, okay. We'll write down that information. But very, very common ways to gather. And then they used to post, I think they still do, but they have a list of like the 20 most used passwords for the year and stuff like that. I used to do that a couple times a year back in the early aughts. And, you know, IT people would pass this out to their stat, you know, to the employees, and basically like, please make sure you're not using any variation of these passwords, because that's also going to be the first things on the list when hackers are going to attempt to bypass systems. All right, account management. Principle of least privilege comes back up again. Restricting user permissions. They should only have the authorization to access the things that bare minimum that they need to do or that they need to do their job. It is much better to assign permissions to groups rather than users. That way you're not making mistakes and you're not missing things. And as they're changing, if they're changing roles, like they're moving from accounting to HR, we can add them to more than one group. So they can be in the accounting group and the HR group, which means they would have the permissions of both. So we're still not having to add individual permissions to that particular user. We are just adding group permissions to them. Another one's login time restrictions. Although this is against most companies' consensus, we don't typically want our employees working 24/7 from home. So we would have login restrictions. If your typical work shift is between, say 9 to 5, we may give you login capability between 7 a.m., give you 2 hours before, and then 7 p.m., 2 hours after, just to give you a little bit of a buffer if you're coming in a little early or you're working a little late or what have you. But if somebody's logging in at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, or if they're trying to log in on the weekends or something like that, the assumption is typically it is not you. And if there is special circumstances where you're going to be needing to work these times, this would need to be cleared with a supervisor and then IT notified so they can adjust your calendar for that time. So login time restrictions. Disabling guest accounts. I know we sound like a broken record when we say this, but that's because many people forget to do this. Many of you probably have guest accounts still active on your computers that you are looking at me on now. Hopefully one weekend you will go in there and say, you know what? I'm going to put some of these best practices to use. get some hands-on experience with it. I'm gonna go change my router password. I'm gonna disable my guest accounts. I'm gonna create an administrator account and a standard user account, and I'm only gonna use my standard user. One day. Failed attempts lockout. It's usually set for about 3 is typically the standard, 3 or 4. And one of two things happens at this point. You can make it so that they're timed out, like a cool off period for about an hour, or you can set it to where they have to contact admin to have, the attempts reopened again. So that'd be your one of 2 ways you could respond to this. Apple did something along this line for their iPads and their iPhones for a little bit. And what they would do is for each failed attempt, they would add more time. So your first cool off period would be like a minute, then it'd be like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and it would just keep adding time. And some poor lady was in the grocery store and her toddler grabbed her phone and just started mashing buttons for like 5 minutes or something like that. And it was something where she was locked out of her phone for like 3 years. And she contacted customer service at Apple and was like, "Hey, can you please help me with this?" And they're like, "No, ma'am, we did not build a workaround for this particular thing. The only thing we can do is reset your phone to scratch. Basically, you're losing everything factory reset." They have since built in a workaround for it now. But yeah, that was something that they would do. And it would just keep adding time and adding time. And it just took a toddler 5 minutes with the phone to show the downfall of that particular security feature, because kids love to push buttons just for the sake of pushing buttons. All right, timeout screen lock. We already talked about this. If somebody's away from their desk for about 5 minutes, should lock their screen. Minimum. So screensaver and then a password to reactivate. This prevents other people from kind of walking by and just be like, empty workstation, sitting down and going ahead and running reports or changing things or causing any sort of mischief on the system. Questions with regards to this? All right. Auto run. This can be used to start executables. Some companies will install this with regards to their software. This can be done with malicious software on USBs. The moment a drive is activated, the program auto runs and tries to install itself on the main system. We want to make sure this is disabled on all our systems. Thankfully, from Windows 7 and beyond, it is disabled by default, but still a good practice to go in and make sure this has not been altered. All right, data encryption, talked about this a bit yesterday. On Windows machines, through the use of BitLocker and EFS, we were able to encrypt data at rest. And then we can use things like VPNs and stuff like that to encrypt data in transit. And there's other third-party programs that can be used for encrypting data in use. But data security is a very specialized field and in high demand for those who are considering it. But as we see here, there always needs to be a balance between our convenience or usability and security. As we all know, the more convenient it is, the less secure it is. The more secure it is, the less convenient it is. We have to find the balance that works for us in our organization. Encrypted files have to be encrypted and decrypted. Like, they have to be decrypted when they're open and encrypted when they're closed. This takes time and processing power. This will slow down devices. It causes more wear on the CPU. And if we're trying to do everything like with BitLocker, the performance of the device may be almost unusable if we're trying to do this at all times. So there is a cost to it. There we go. Patch management. So most patches are meant to fix something that doesn't work properly, or they're adding additional functionality. Some of them can close security holes and zero-day attacks. If they are particularly centered around security, we call them hot fixes, because they're going to come out as soon as they are available, and you need to apply them as soon as possible because they are to close up vulnerabilities or fix any major security issues. Beyond that, we're looking at service pack updates, which is the full-blown like new versions of Windows. So you're going from 10.5.1 all the way to 10.5.2 or something like that. So with the non-security based ones, we still want to run tests on these updates and service packs to make sure they're not going to adversely affect our systems. If it's not security based, we may hold off on applying them until a hot fix is applied or a new patch. Questions on this? Kind of a review, but good to drive it home. Big pitfalls with regards to securing the PCs, forgetting passwords. This is such a huge issue. It was such a huge issue that typically you would have at least one person in IT whose dedicated job was to do nothing but change passwords. That's all they did all day, day in and day out, Monday through Friday, after they drink their coffee, just answering phone and changing passwords. Sounds exciting, right? This was typically handed off to interns and the new hires, like you were just hoping to goodness somebody would leave the company so you could move up and they bring somebody else in to do the password thing so you can get to the other stuff. But some industrious intern figured out, hey, I can write a script for this and I can sit here and just drink coffee all day while the script goes ahead and just resets the passwords for me. Well, unfortunately, it negated a job. But problem still remains. One of the biggest problems with securing workstations and anything is the forgetting passwords, and the fact that we need to remember dozens and dozens of passwords for every single system we get into and have to use a multi-factor for everything these days. Password fatigue sets in. I've got 500 passwords I gotta remember because I have to use a different password for everything. What are some ways we can mitigate this on a corporate level? What's something we can do?
Would like the software that Google OS uses, that Chrome OS uses, remember password thing?
Well, that would work for Chrome, right? So that would work on that would work on that particular operating system.
Well,
So
maybe there's
one.
a different system.
Yeah, there is. So they do have password managers. Like Keychain is the one that works on the Mac OS. Justin saying SSO. What does that acronym stand for there, Justin?
Single sign-on.
Single sign-on. Very good. So we authenticate with a server using multi-factor, prove we are who we say we are, and then from there it gives us a bunch of tickets, which allows us to sign into everything else. So we only have to sign in one time, and then we're authorized through everything else. What's the downfall of this?
Security.
Okay. How so?
Maybe because it doesn't require it's only require one sign to get in pretty much one password if you guess it correctly.
Yeah, so if somebody bypasses that one piece of security, right, they have access to everything. So it's a single point of failure. And ideally, we would like to try to avoid single points of failure wherever possible. We like to have some redundancy in place in case that single point fails, right? So that's one thing. Very good, Chris. Too much encryption. Our data is super protected. I use 5 different encrypting softwares before I send an email. You know, sounds great, except for it's going to be heavily weighed upon our PC. Hold on 1 second. I swear I'm not going crazy. All right. So encryption is processor heavy. So we need to find that balance between what is secure enough for our data versus, the performance costs on the back end for encrypting and decrypting.
Kelly.
Yeah.
So how secure would you say are the keychains though?
I would say moderate. If they have the administrator password to your computer, you're wide open. Which is why I say don't use the administrator password. So it basically knows to sign in and log into your Mac, and you haven't, changed the administrator password, then you're wide open. But it's modestly secure for the average person. I always get a little dodgy with the third-party software with regards to password managers, because a few of them have been exposed in the last couple of years as password harvesters. So they have stolen, basically people's passwords for everything, and then we're either using or selling that data.
Would you recommend one in particular, or not at all?
Not currently, because the one I would have recommended recently got busted for that. And so
Which one was that, by any chance?
what was it? It was like red. Give me a second. I'll have to find it. But it was one I had saved because I don't use one. I use a different method for storing my passwords.
Was it 1Password?
No, it was like LastPass or something like that.
Oh, thank God.
I think
I
that was
know
the one.
with downloading, I do a lot of music recording, and just taking this class, I've learned how much I've left myself vulnerable when I've been downloading software, and they ask me those questions like, you need to, it's screaming in red letters, you need to change your administrative password, and I just like, next, never mind, I don't need to do
Yeah,
that.
I'll get to it. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
so convenient to not use a password.
It really is. It really is. And again, that's that convenient security question,
And I hope I'm not going off topic, but now that technology is moving forward and we're doing these face IDs and stuff like that, how do you feel about that?
I'm not a fan of facial recognition because it's all too often getting used for bad means. So I am not a big fan of facial recognition. I'm also leery about giving any of my biometric data to companies in general, because once they have it, they can use it, kind of thing. So I am leery about that stuff. With regards to its security promises, it can be really secure. Facial recognition is shown to have a lot of weaknesses where you can have close relatives, and obviously you're going to have similar facial features because of
my 13-year-old daughter is in my phone all the time because of this.
Yeah, because there's specific reference points it's using on your face. And I think the early ones only use like 6 or 7 points of reference measurements and would determine, whether or not you would have access. I think they're up to like 15 now. It's still not great because like my sons can unlock my phones if I use facial recognition, part of why I don't use it. And then the same with fingerprints. Fingerprints, they would use 6 or 7 points on your fingerprint and the measurements to determine whether or not you would grant access. Scarier still, I think it was law enforcement only used 4 or 5, which is terrifying because that puts a lot of possibilities, like cross possibilities, for false positives. So biometrics, I'm very leery on because of these kind of things. I think the only ones I would be, I guess, kind of okay with, because it would be harder to fake, would be like the vein recognition in your palms and maybe the retinals. Those are more intrusive.
I have a problem. Whenever I go out of the country and come back, they would never recognize my thumbprints because it's all burnt out.
Yeah. Yeah, if you have any scarring and stuff like that on fingerprint. Yeah. Oh yeah, you're right. You know, there's a multitude of reasons where they don't necessarily work. And what they do is they have measurements of false positive versus false negatives. And then where that intersects, there's I forget the term they use for it. I can't remember the acronym right off, but it's a measurement that they would determine how secure it is, like how many people that shouldn't have access are getting access versus how many people who should have access not getting access. So I don't know. The encryption software. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it doesn't sound like there's any form of encryption that means any form of password protection that would be just like perfect.
Nothing is perfect. Again, this great statement there, Andrew. That's why we have to create the layers. And then with encryption now, I might have mentioned this to y'all, but a lot of organizations and stuff are just capturing data now, even if it's encrypted. They know they can't break it with their current systems, but they're just capturing information because sometimes information is valuable for years at a time. Like banking information, manufacturing information, product formulas, chip design, all that stuff could be valuable for several years at a time. And so what they're doing now, because we're on the cusp of quantum computing coming out, and though quantum computing isn't necessarily good for day-to-day use, what it's really good for is code making and code breaking. Because of the quantum states that they use the bits in. Because like a bit can either be on or off or both at the same time in a quantum computer. It's like at a architectural level, that's kind of how they operate. And so it makes it really, really easy for them to break any modern encryption. And we are on the cusp in the next 5 years of these becoming readily available. And so companies right now are, kind of like Schrodinger's cat. It can be alive or dead at the same time. And so what these organizations are doing are capturing as much data as they can, because they know within the next 5 years or so, they're going to be able to just easily decrypt it. So not doing anything with it now, except just storing it. So there's issues like that going on as well. That would be governments doing this. That would be, organized crime organizations, hacking, organizations. All these people are operating under these premises right now.
How are they capturing the information?
Just basically recording it as it's in transit.
Okay.
So it's like tapping a phone, right? So they're just tapping and recording right now. They can't read it. It doesn't make any sense, but eventually they'll be able to crack it.
I'm sorry. If we were looking at it on the from the IP, the ISO model, would that be like within the networking layer that they're seeing information and capturing the encryption? Or would that be at the application?
Okay, sorry, one more time, Andrew. I was having a hard time hearing you.
Like if we were look at the ISO model and the encryption data that they're capturing, you said they captured during transit. So that's so they're capturing during the transit layer, right?
Yes. Well, they're capturing it at the physical layer, like as it's being transmitted over the lines.
Oh, that early in, huh?
So because they're not going to capture it inside the computer as it's moving up through the OSI layers. So they have to capture it in transit after the encryption algorithm has already been placed upon it. And then they're going to try to unlock that encryption later. So they're just holding it now. Yes, sorry, Justin, I didn't see that, but yeah, early facial recognition, you can use a picture to unlock a phone. Now they want to see slight movement in the face, and you have to have direct eye contact for it to unlock. So
I'm sorry to interrupt again.
You're fine.
What does that mean what does that mean for security? Like if quantum computing is going to be able to, basically get through all these, encryption, how are they
That's an amazing question, Devon, and that's one that's being answered right now. A lot of security professionals are scrambling on this one, and there are quantum computers already out there. And so what they're trying to do now is figure out how to use that quantum architecture to create the next level of encryption or the next type of encryption that can't be bypassed easily by quantum computing. You know, it's essentially we're on the cusp of a major leap forward technologically, and we have to be able to counter that. And so it's a race. It always is with security. You know, we're never in a state of, oh, we can just kick back and relax. No, we're in a constant state of, you know, they get better, we get better, they get better, we get better, they get better, we get better. It's a constant fight. That's part of why security is interesting, is because we have to be on the cusp. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said, Devon.
I just said evil doesn't sleep.
Correct. You are correct. And in cybersecurity, hackers only have to be successful once. We have to be successful every time. So we're already at a disadvantage from that perspective. All right. Not to get all doom and gloom, but you know, it's more just interesting technologies that are evolving. Relatively quick and painless one. Just a slight sidebar into the weeds on security. Any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, revelations? No? We are all security experts. I love it.